for that, we could do just
What's
an
that?
idea. If you're interested in becoming an affiliate for my programs, we have a affiliate program.
Oh, okay, great.
Throw that in. I can send you some info.
No worries. Sounds good. Mm-hmm. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Tim Blankenship here with divorce661.com. Today we are talking with Liam Naden with liamnaden.com. And today we're talking about how to stop your divorce. So we're talking, do not get divorced. Do not have to use my service. That would always be a benefit. Liam has a couple of programs we're going to talk about, how to stop your divorce, even when your spouse doesn't want to. And we're going to talk about his new book called Marriage Uncounseling. How are you doing today, Liam?
Very well, thanks, Tim. It's great to meet you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, no, very happy to have you here. I think my listeners are tired of hearing me talk about divorce. So I've been talking to coaches and marriage therapists, and that, like when I saw your information on Podmatch, I said, I have to get you on the show.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to see why I am so blurry here. We'll figure this out in a second. So yeah, where do you want to start? Maybe we could talk about just how a little bit about your backstory and how you got into this. I know you've published like 20 books, so you have a lot of kind of credentials going on. I was looking at your all your information there. You just want to give us a little brief background of how you fell into all this?
Sure. Well, I'm not one of those people who can say to you, I've been married to the same person for 35 years and we've never had an argument. I come from the other direction, which is I've been through a couple of marriages myself, and one particularly unhappy, destructive divorce, which actually ended up in me losing everything and becoming homeless. But it was a great lesson. And but after I went through my second bad marriage, I decided I need to figure this relationship stuff out, because what I'm doing isn't right. Because it's not working for me. And as I rebuilt my life from the homeless, penniless state, I started to become a marriage and relationships coach, because I wanted to figure out, before I did that actually, I wanted to figure out, how do relationships really work? What are the foundations? What are the pieces that go together to make a relationship work or not? So I did a lot of work on that, and I could relate it to myself and my own experiences on what didn't work. And also a new relationship which I developed where things were working in a very different way, and I wanted to figure out what the difference was. So that really took me down to do a lot of research and study, not only about myself, but in observing other people in relationships, and also doing lots of other study as well. And I thought what was fascinating was, what is the difference between a great relationship that stays great? In other words, probably the 5% or less of relationships that get better with time, where people, they might have been together 10 or 20 years or even 30 years, but they're still madly in love with each other, and they don't seem to have many problems, and their relationship actually enhances their own personal experience rather than it being a struggle, compared to what seemed to be the vast majority who had problems in their marriage or relationship. And very often it was problems that led to divorce, or it could just be problems that they struggled with for decades, and they never managed to break through and say, we've got over our problems. Some of the people I've worked with have been in therapy or counseling for 20 or 30 years. And I thought, that can't be right. They shouldn't have to do that. So I thought, what's the difference between most people who struggle in their relationship and the few who have a really amazing relationship? And that led me into coaching and helping people primarily turn their struggling marriage into one of the small minority of a great marriage. And really it only came down to a few simple principles, because most of the people who came to me, I started to work with people and show them, when their marriage was on the edge of divorce, how they could turn that around. And very often it was one of the couple who didn't want the divorce. That's what's my coaching programs are very much geared to, although they do help people who are both struggling with their marriage. But I thought, what is the difference? How can I help people really get a result? Because what I noticed was, when I started to coach people, some people were getting a great result. They were getting what they wanted, which was to heal their marriage, or even to move on from their marriage in a good way, in a relatively non-stressful way. But they got a good result, and other people didn't. And what I found was, it wasn't actually a question of motivation. I mean, everybody who comes to me and who came to me, they're all absolutely committed to healing their marriage, particularly if they don't want a divorce. So it wasn't about motivation or determination. It also wasn't about prayer, for instance, because some people would pray for their marriage to be healed, and it didn't. And other people didn't pray at all, and they did heal their marriage. And it also wasn't to do with the amount of information people had, because again, this puzzled me. I'd give people the same information. Some people would use it and other people wouldn't. And that's what really led me on to develop not only my coaching programs and relationships, but in other areas, to say, what is the foundation? What is really going on here? What really works? And that's what I do now. That's the basis of my coaching.
And you, I guess, mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things you've developed, numerous courses, and again, published multiple books and so forth. I think I read a stat on your website that 70% of traditional counseling or therapy fails.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the research that's been done shows that. And in my own personal experience, people listening or watching might have had a positive experience with counseling, but the vast majority, probably nearly everybody who's come to me for help, has said, we tried it, but it didn't work, or it might have even made things worse, which is a bit of a sad statistic when you really think about it.
Yeah. Did this research find why therapy or counseling is so unsuccessful?
Well, it did. And in fact, that's the core why I called my book Marriage Uncounseling, because it's like, well, if counseling doesn't work for a lot of people, for most people, why doesn't it work? And therefore, maybe the opposite works, or maybe what would really work instead. And I think the fundamental difference is the reason why I've found, or why people have told me that counseling hasn't worked for them. The fundamental issue is that it focuses on trying to solve problems. And I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but the thing is, and I've really worked this out and researched why this is, but when you focus on trying to solve problems, something happens to your brain biologically. And what you really do is you create more problems. If you're in the cycle of trying to solve problems, you stay in the cycle of creating more problems, and therefore never getting out of this problem situation. And I think, I used to go to counseling personally as well when I was in my marriages. And one of the problems with it is you go into counseling and you go, okay, so what's the problem? Right, well, one of you acts in this way and that causes a reaction, just as an example. Okay, so you need to stop that behavior so that you don't get that reaction. But the problem is you come out of a counseling session and you think, well, what was I supposed to do again? And
Right.
also in the heat of the moment, you think, I did it again. I did the thing I'm not supposed to do. So this is the issue. If you're focused on what behavior you should change, you can't. The way your brain works is it won't actually do that in the moment necessarily, and then you end up in the cycle of continually trying to, figure out why you do the things that you do, rather than really getting to the foundation and say, well, why do I do the things that I do? Not just in that instance, but in every instance.
Can you shed some light on what some of the counterintuitive approaches are that you bring up in your book?
Sure. Well, the easiest way to understand, I think, the general approach was, remember I mentioned earlier about looking at people in great relationships versus people the majority who were struggling or were having problems. And one of the things I thought was, the people in great relationships are doing something very different. But it's more than just what they're doing. It's the way they're approaching their relationship. And I thought, is there a way to help the people who are struggling to have the same approach? And what I realized was, everybody, virtually everybody who's struggling in their marriage or relationship had a time when they were like the 5%, when they didn't have problems, when things were going wonderfully well, when they were excited and happy and loved being in the relationship and didn't see the faults with the other person. There was a time all these people, most people, were acting like the 5%. And that time was, of course, when they first got together. You know, when you first get together in a relationship, you don't have problems. You're not focusing on solving problems. And you're not, all you're doing is just enjoying being there. So how can you get back to that place that you actually had at one point in your relationship, which was early on? And so on a very simple level, one of the things you need to do, very simplistically, is you need to think about, what did I used to do then that I'm not doing now? Because we get into these habits, we get into a relationship we get married, and then life comes along and the pressures of, financial pressures, getting a mortgage, getting a home, setting up a home, children come along, career, all these things. And we forget to do the things that made our marriage or relationship strong in those early days. So it's about figuring out, and often it's very simple things. For instance, I say to people sometimes, when was the last time you smiled at your husband or your wife? And some people go, oh dear, you're right, that's a very long time. Just a smile, it's a simple thing. But of course, if you're bogged down in your problems and you're stressed and you're not happy, and when you look at your husband or your wife and all you see is, things going wrong in your life, if that's your focus, you don't smile at them. And that's just a simple habit that actually can make all of the difference to that relationship.
How is it that people don't see that happening, or like when you're coaching people or counseling people, is there a point when you're counseling them that you walk them back in time when they realize, well, here's where maybe this started to go south, and they either didn't recognize it, or it just, because they aren't communicating and everything else is going on in their life, they just don't want to deal with it?
Yes, well, my approach is a little bit different, I suppose, in that regard. Whereas rather than focus on the past, what's caused you to get to this place, when did it start to go wrong? Why not just focus on the present and say, what do you really want? You want a great relationship. You want a great marriage. So forget all of that, because very often we can get into this state of analysis of the past and why it went wrong, and whose fault it was, or what people often do is they blame themselves and they say, well, I should have done something differently, and if only I'd done this, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. But the fact is that whatever you did, and there's no point beating yourself up about it. And the other problem with analysis of the past is you don't really know why you did what you did. You think you do. What the brain tends to do is, if you ask it a question, if you say, why did you behave in a certain way, your brain will come up with an answer, but it's not the real answer. You probably don't know what the real answer is. So it's not really important to know why you are where you are, other than to say, well, what can we do now that we're here? Let's analyze this. Let's look at the foundations of where our relationship is at the moment, and what can we do to get back to the feelings that we had when we first got together.
So your approach is not worrying about the past so much, it's looking into the future and not trying to identify so much why they were done, but what we need to do to have a successful marriage or relationship moving forward.
Yeah, and that's really, again, if you think about uncounseling, rather than focusing on the past and the problems, it's about saying, right, what do we need to do now? Let's not worry about why things have happened the way they have, other than saying, how can maybe there's something that can help us in this present moment to understand the difference between what we are doing right now and what we should be doing if we want our marriage to get back to what it was.
Liam, so someone wants to, they identify that their marriage or relationship isn't great. They want to take steps to improve their relationship. One thing that I'm intrigued about is in this book, you will learn how to get your spouse as committed to your relationship as you are, even if they want to leave. I'd like to spend a few minutes on that if we could, and if you can talk about some points of your book that address that specific issue someone could have if they find their spouse not wanting to work on the relationship.
Okay. Well, here's the thing that most people have forgotten. If you're in the situation where your husband or your wife wants to leave and you don't want them to, or if you're just in the situation where you want to work on your marriage and you want to improve it, and maybe they're not so interested and they think, they can't be bothered, they're too busy with their career or whatever, and they're just happy with the way things are, or prepared to accept the way things are. But here's something that most people seem to have forgotten about commitment, and that is people commit to something if they want to. You can't force somebody. You can't. And so when it comes to a marriage, you can't say to somebody, you should be committed to our marriage, or you should do this. You should go to counseling with me. You should work on our relationship with me. You can't force people to do that. But what you can do is you can make them want to do that. And the way you make people want to do anything is you get them to see that there is some benefit to them in doing it. So the simple thing is, if you want to get your spouse as committed to your marriage as you are, you've got to ask yourself, how can I be the sort of person they would want to be committed to? How can I be the sort of person that they would want to put ahead of anyone or anything else in our life? So it's all about me. It's all about my own attractiveness to them. And that doesn't mean going and getting all dressed up or changing your hairstyle or getting, plastic surgery. And it also doesn't mean doing what you think would be attractive to them or what should be attractive to them. It's finding out what really is attractive to them. And one of the clues, of course, is what they found attractive about you in the early days of your relationship. And the funny thing is, it's not actually about how you look or whatever those things are. It's about how you make them feel. Do you make them feel respected? Do you make them feel listened to? In other words, if they came to you and said they weren't happy about something or they wanted to do something, would you judge them and say, well, you shouldn't do that, and I'm really upset that you would want to do that, or that's really hurtful, or I disagree, you should, I'm never going to agree, or I'm going to try and change your mind from wanting to do that. Classic being, sorry, I want a divorce or I want a separation. If they told you that, would you try and talk them out of it? Because by trying to talk them out of it, what you're saying to them, what you're getting them to hear is they don't respect me. They're thinking, this person, I'm telling them I'm not happy in our marriage. I'm telling them what upsets me. I'm telling them what I think is wrong. And they're not listening to me. They're not, all they're doing is getting upset and they're only concerned about how they feel. They're not concerned about how I feel. So if you can get to that stage where you can make your spouse feel loved, respected, admired, all of those things more than anyone else or any other place, they're not going to want to leave. They're going to find you attractive. They're going to want to stay. They're going to see you as the solution to their problems, not the cause of their problems. And very often, of course, when people want a divorce, it's because they see that their marriage is the cause of their problems. So it's a question to ask yourself, how can I make myself the solution? How can I make myself the person that my husband or wife turns to in their moments of despair, in their moment, and the one place they can go on this earth where they feel totally safe, where they can be themselves? You want you to be that place. And when you do, they're not going to want to leave.
Can you give some examples about how someone would go about doing that? Maybe a specific experience that you had with some of your coaching clients, but how would you advise me, for instance, probably a better way to do this? How would you advise me to go about this process of finding out what it was that was attractive to my spouse of me?
Well, it's really not that difficult when you think about it, because it's probably also the things that you found attractive about them. And it was things like you felt respected, you felt admired, you felt like they thought that you were the most amazing person on the planet. And you'd say that to them. I think you're the most amazing person I've ever met. And you'd say it in a genuine way, because that's how you felt, not that you were trying to influence their mind, or, get them to feel differently about you. You just said it because you genuinely believed it. So it's really things like that. And of course, the fundamental thing that you have now in your marriage that you didn't have then, that's causing you all the problems, that didn't cause you any of the problems then, you know what it is? It's fear. When you really think about it, when you first got together with somebody, you had no fear. And because you didn't have any fear about the relationship, you didn't have any fear about it ending or the other person, upsetting you or whatever, you just got on and had great fun. And because you didn't have any fear or expectation, you could be yourself and you could just enjoy the moment. But now you have all these fears. Oh, what would happen if we didn't stay together? What would happen to our children? Or I'd be a failure? Or everybody tells me now that we're married, we have to stay together for the rest of our life, and we have to solve all our problems. And what would happen if, if we ended this marriage? I'd have to give up all my money, or I'd be financially hard hit, or, as I say, the children would be really badly affected, or everyone else would say you're a failure, or I would think I was a failure. So you have all these fears, and that your fears are what is stopping you from being able to go up to your spouse or your husband or your wife and say, I think you're amazing. I know you want a divorce, and if that's what you want, who am I to step in your way? I mean, obviously, I'm really sad about it, but I'll get over it. I'll find someone else. If that's what you really want, I totally understand. I have total respect for you. And okay, we'll get on with our life. And how can we do this in the best way possible? And the children will be fine. They will be much better off seeing two happy parents who aren't together than a miserable couple. They'll be fine, and they'll learn the lesson that it's important not to have fear. Now, if you had all of that reaction to in your case, your wife, do you think she'd feel a little bit better about you than if you said, oh, no, you can't leave me. I don't know what, right. I love you so much, and I will fight for our marriage, and I will never give up, and, I'll do whatever it takes. How are you going to feel? You're going to feel, They haven't listened to a word I've said. They don't care about how I feel, and they only care about how they feel because they're afraid that they can't move on, that their life would be terrible without you. So it's the fear that's the core of it.
And that makes total sense. I was just taking some notes here. Do you, in your opinion, when one person is asking another for divorce, which usually probably came down to also a lack of communication, because I'll find in what I do, that many times one spouse is completely unaware that their spouse was unhappy. And how does that happen? I would think that if one spouse is completely unhappy, that there has to be some notion by the other spouse that something's just not quite right.
Yeah. So if the person thinks, if it was a total shock to say if your wife comes to you and it's a total shock to you, then the real question to ask is, why didn't I know already? And not beat yourself up about it, but just say, well, here's a lesson to learn. This is really great. This is a gift. This is a lesson on paying attention in a relationship. And it's also a lesson in saying, if my wife or my husband decides that they really do want a divorce, that they're no longer happy in our marriage, that's okay. It's only fear that would make you say it's not okay. If you have a job, I say this to people, have you ever, say, how many jobs have you ever had in your life? And they say, 2 or 3. Well, when you were in a job, you took the job because you really thought it was going to be great, and you do really well at it, and you'd be at it a long time, and you put all this effort in, but there came a point when it was no longer right for you, and you just thought, oh, well, I need to get another job because it was good, but it's no longer really doing for me what I want it to do. So I'll find another job. And you go off and you find another job. Now, you don't beat yourself up and say, what a failure I was. I have to stay in this job for the rest of my life because I'm committed to it, and because I started out and I put all this time and energy in, I can't possibly fail, and I'll never find another job that's better. So I have to stay in this. You don't think like that, and you don't think you're a failure because your job is no longer satisfying to you. But in relationships, we tend to think that because society has conditioned us to think that we are a failure. There's something wrong with us if we can't make a marriage work. But people change. We change. Our spouse changes. And sometimes you're just no longer right for each other. So if somebody comes along to you and says they want to divorce your husband or your wife, and you had no clue about that's what they wanted, instead of beating yourself up about it, just say, wow, okay, that's a learning experience. What can I learn from this? I'll take it with me moving forward in my life. It's good. It's not your fault necessarily. People beat themselves up about what happens in their relationship, but it's not all you. Your husband, your wife, they're as imperfect, if you like, a person as you are. So, and they're on their own journey, learning their own things. So it's about taking the pressure off yourself. On my website, I call it, you have to let yourself off the hook. You have to stop blaming yourself for everything that's happening in your life, because it's not actually all your fault.
What would you say to people who in these scenarios go up to their spouse and say, I want a divorce, and in the scenario where the other spouse had absolutely no idea, is there steps that the unhappy spouse can take prior to just the announcement of divorce? I mean, I'm assuming the people that are shocked in these circumstances, do you think that there was never a conversation at all up to that point about the unhappiness of the spouse now asking for divorce?
Well, part of the problem is if you get into trying to analyze. So say if your husband or wife came to you and said, I want a divorce, and you said, well, this is news to me. It's a total shock. Why didn't you mention this before?
Yeah.
Where that conversation goes becomes all sorts of analysis and, well, I tried to tell you this, but you weren't listening. Oh, but I didn't know that that's what you meant. Oh, but there was this situation where you didn't respond in a way that I thought, or this has been building up, or you've been acting in this way for years, and you're thinking, did I act in this way for years? So you can see where this is going, or where it goes. It just becomes this enormous analysis when neither person really knows what's happened or what's brought them to that point. They might like to think they do, and they've got all these explanations and analyses, but they're not necessarily the real reason, because the real reason is the person who wants to divorce is no longer happy in the marriage. Now, they might have come up with all sorts of reasons and justifications, but even in their own brain, they're not necessarily the real reasons. They're just explanations that their brain is giving them as to why they're not happy. So if your husband or your wife comes and says to you they want a divorce, the temptation is to get into all of the analysis and to say, well, why is this happening? And then you get this, as I say, this backwards and forwards discussion. But the problem with that is the person who wants the divorce, they don't want all of that stuff. They don't want to have to go through this great long explanation. What they want is you to respect them. Or what they're going to respond to best is if you respect them without drama and without trying to, so maybe you want to understand some things about why it's happened for your own sake, but you can do that without all of the tons of analysis. You can just ask them a few things and go, thanks, I'll really need to think about that. But the most important thing you need to do straight off is show them that is not to react badly, but to show them that you respect them, not only for their decision, but for their right to make a decision about their own life, whether you agree with it or not. That is their right. And you should, particularly if you love them and you say you love them and you love them unconditionally, you respect and love their ability to be responsible for their own life. That step alone, which cuts out the next 50 steps that many people think they need to go along, that step alone is going to make your spouse think, oh, I don't feel bad telling my husband or my wife that I want a divorce. It just sows a little seed. Maybe it's not the right thing, but if they don't feel bad around you, they are going to want to stay. Maybe.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I recently had a divorce case where the husband was caught off guard with being told. He had no idea. Very, very similar to what we're talking about. And wanted and was willing to do anything to salvage the marriage. And the wife just stopped, moved out, said, I want a divorce, moved out that same day and completely cut all communication. So it was very frustrating for him to, when he wants to kind of do whatever it takes to reconcile and wife's not communicating, already hired a divorce attorney and all that. I mean, sometimes, like you said, it's just gonna happen. But the question about this is, what would cause someone to get to that point in a relationship or marriage where they would do something that drastic? You just say, I want a divorce, I'm moving out, got the attorney, and doesn't want to hear anything about reconciliation. Did they just get to a point well beyond being able to reconcile in their mind, or if they're just completely done?
Well, I guess this is what I'm really saying about the analysis. How do we know? It could be the moon phase is different this month, or really it could be anything. But trying to figure out why it's happened, I don't think is really either relevant or even helpful. What the issue is to say, well, can I? They want a divorce. What does that mean right now? And you mentioned an interesting thing. You said your client or whatever who would do anything to save his marriage. Now, here's the thing, because people come to me and say that as well. And I say to them, okay, you will do anything to save your marriage. But just imagine this situation, and I know it's not what you're looking for and not what you're expecting, but you walk out the door tomorrow and you meet this amazing woman, you just bump into each other. And it turns out, on a gut level, and you start talking to her, she's the most amazing woman you've ever met, and you fall absolutely head over heels in love with her, and you start to get to know her, and she gets to know you, and you've got everything in common, and everything that you thought a relationship could be, this is it 10 times. It's far better than the marriage you have with your current wife. This person is amazing. Now, if you're in that situation, if that happened, would you still want to do anything, whatever it took, to save your marriage? No. And the reason is because you no longer have fear that something better or as good is coming up. The only reason people say, I'll do anything to save my marriage, is because of their fear that nothing better than their marriage could possibly exist.
Comes back to the fear.
It's all based on the fear. Absolutely. And it's actually to do with how the brain works. A lot of my new work is all around how your brain controls your behavior and therefore controls your results. And it's fear is the enemy. Fear gets you doing all of the wrong things because your brain literally is programmed to do the wrong things when you're in a fearful state.
That makes sense. So let's talk about how we get people to not be in this situation. One of your questions you are ready to answer is, how do you create a problem-free marriage? Maybe we could start there, and then we never have to get to where what we've been discussing.
Well, essentially, and this is in the book as well, it's to focus on something else other than the problems. And people say, but I've got too many problems. Once I fix these problems, then everything will be fine. And they seem to think that's the way life works, but it really isn't, because the way your brain works, you have I won't get too technical, but you have two parts of your brain. One is the problem-solving part of your brain, and the other is the problem-creating part of your brain. The problem-creating part of your brain runs on fear, stress, anxiety, worry, frustration, anger. All of those things activate a part of your brain which creates problems. And not only creates problems, it can't see the real solution to a problem. So when you're using this part of your brain, and we know this feeling when you're frustrated, I'm trying to solve this problem. I'm sure there's an answer to it, and I'll do this, and that'll fix the problem, and it never does. That part of your brain isn't the solution, the problem-solving part of your brain. There's another part that is the part that you activate when you're totally clear in your thinking, when you know exactly the right thing to do in any moment, you know the wrong things to avoid. It's when you get new ideas that come along, when you wake up and go, there's the solution to that problem. When you get insights, inspiration, when you see, on a wider level, when you see different opportunities around you, perhaps in business or things to do for your life, all of these things, and we've all experienced these moments of clarity, not very often because we're not using the part of our brain that, and this is what I teach in my other work as well, how to switch you from this fear-based, limited part of your brain to the problem-solving part of your brain. And when you operate in that place, from that part of your brain, you literally, your problems, if you have them, dissolve. Now, they might dissolve in a different way to what you thought they would. In other words, for instance, your marriage, if you think there are a lot of problems in your marriage, your creative brain, I call it, might say and show you and lead you to the fact you're in the wrong marriage. So you need to clear that one away for the better one to come along. So that might be it. Or it might be that somebody comes into your life that is the solution to the problem, whatever it is. But that's the way you create a problem-free marriage, is you operate from this creative part of your brain, which is not the part that you can operate from when you have fear in your life. Fear activates this wrong part of your brain, and that's what keeps you stuck, keeps you frustrated. It keeps you having problems, because this part of your brain, the fear part, it's programmed to focus on problems. It's always looking for the negative in your life, and if it can't see it, it makes more. That's how you create a problem-free marriage. It's actually how, dare I say it, how you create a problem-free life.
So it sounded like the trick was to learn how to trigger that creative portion versus the fear portion.
Yeah.
How does one do that?
I have a whole new coaching program on all of that, because there's a bit more to it. Firstly,
Okay.
You need to understand how your brain works. This is a biological thing. This isn't some airy-fairy idea of, the mind or subconscious or changing your thoughts and beliefs and all of, law of attraction. This is actually pure biology, because biologically, if you look around in nature, everything is programmed for success. Everything is why we are biologically programmed to survive. And the way we survive is by being the best that we can be. When we're the best that we can be, we have the greatest chance for survival. So our brain is literally designed to make sure we are the best that we can be, so that we have the greatest chance for survival. That includes being our happiest. That includes not having problems and stress, because problems and stress don't extend your life. They don't make you more creative and resourceful, and they actually damage you physically as well. So you need to understand what our role is, and the fact we're naturally designed to live without problems, without stress, because that's what this part of our brain, we're supposed to be using this part of our brain nearly all of the time. But unfortunately, nearly everyone's got in the habit of using the other part of the brain nearly all the time. And then we wonder why we've got problems and stress in our life. It's not natural biologically. It doesn't happen in the rest of nature. The rest of nature doesn't have stress and problems. And the only difference is nature is using the natural mechanics of how it's designed. In other words, every organism is using its brain the right way, and we've just all been taught how to use it the wrong way.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's probably a lot that goes into that. I had an idea that it wasn't going to be like the law of attraction type experience.
No, because unfortunately, all of that stuff, and I've done an awful lot of work, and I'm not denigrating any other work as well, but none of that really worked for me, because I realized that so many things, whether it's prayer and religion or spirituality or meditation or motivation, goal setting, law of attraction. The problem when you go down that track with so many things is, it's all built on fear. You're afraid, and you're trying to overcome a problem by using one of these things. But that's why they don't work for you, because you're stuck in the wrong part of your brain. Whereas if you're in the other part of your brain, all of these things are going to happen in a natural way.
Makes total sense. I want to dive into a couple of your programs you have. I'm going to bring this back up if I can here. You have your book, your marriage and counseling book, and you have some courses, 30-day program, Stop Your Divorce, 7-day program. That probably is based off the book, I would imagine. Can you talk about, just kind of give us a brief overview of these and who these would be appropriate for?
Okay, well, my 7-day program called Stop Your Divorce, that's really for people who've been in the situation where their husband or their wife comes and tells them, I want a divorce and it needs to happen now. So how do you turn it around quickly? because you don't have, and particularly if they don't want to go to counseling, or when they're done, in other words. So the Stop Your Divorces, it's not going to put your marriage back into the most wonderful relationship that exists, but it's going to stop hopefully it will for you. It's going to help you stop them walking out the door. If they do, or if they are walking out the door, if they already have walked out the door, then it's a way to get some of the right energy, the right things happening to get them to come back or to reconsider. And in other words, gives you a bit of time. And so that's the 7-day program. The 30-day program is a more in-depth program about saying, well, what are the foundations of our marriage and why has it gone wrong? Rather than dealing with all the problems and like we've talked about, what's caused what's caused our foundations to crumble?
Which one are you talking about now?
This is the 30-day Save Your Marriage Relationship Transformation Program. Yeah, this is really about rebuilding your marriage, and it's still very appropriate and very useful if your husband or wife wants a divorce as well, because it takes you back to building it from the ground up, overcoming hurt and pain, and how to rebuild intimacy, how to rebuild communication, which is such a critical thing that people have lost. And there's a lot more things as well in that program.
So the Save Your Marriage or Stop Your Divorce program, that sounds like that's just for the person who is asked to, found out that their spouse wants a divorce. The Save Your Marriage program, is this done individually or together with spouses? I've had both do it. Couples do it together, but mainly, and I'd say this for anyone considering it, consider just doing it on your own, at least to start with, because again, there's nothing probably, or a very counterintuitive, detrimental thing to your marriage would be if you're having problems and your husband or your wife says, I'm not happy, I want a divorce. It's not really going to help if you go along to them and say, okay, but can we do this program together? Because again, you're saying to them, I don't respect you. You think our marriage is over, but I want to fix it, and come and do this. Let's work on our marriage together. So it's designed more for people who individually to do it, so that you make the changes to yourself that your spouse starts to notice, and therefore starts to reconsider that maybe your marriage does have hope. Your marriage is worth working on and salvaging. And then they very often become involved as well. But really both of these are designed to do them on your own. Your husband or your wife doesn't even need to know you're doing that. And just to make those changes, because they focus on the changes that you make to yourself, becoming that person that they fell in love with, which is, of course, the real you. But it's the you that you've lost sight of, and that sort of got buried in the mists of time, as it were, with all the issues in your life that have created all these fears that you have. You no longer feel safe to be yourself, to go, life's great, I'm great, everything's going to work out fine. You no longer feel like that, and that's what causes you to do all the things that make things worse and create more problems. I think it's interesting that I'm sure people don't find you until they've realized, they've started doing research, Google searches on these topics, and then come across your content and your podcasts and your books and so forth. But with, before they enter a program like this, and that others have, that with, divorce being, 50+% as a statistic, and you're talking about only 5% of relationships are actually in good standing and there aren't problems, if I understood you correctly, that it's unfortunate that, these courses could come in handy before there's a problem, and just go through it before it gets to a point where someone's asking for divorce.
Absolutely. And, that is the tragedy, as you say, that people, we've been taught more about how to use our car, how to drive a car, than we have been taught how a relationship works. And we've just been told, if you love each other, and, if you work at it and commit to it, that it's going to work. But, you've got two people involved, and two people who are changing all the time through life. It just doesn't work like that. And that's what causes so much of the not only the frustration and stress, but just all this wasted energy, wasted time trying to analyze and work on things. And, but it's a little bit like one analogy I use in the book, actually, is that, if you come home to your house one day and you see a crack on the wall, you go, there's a crack on the wall, I better fix that. So what do? You go down to the hardware store and you go, I've got a crack on my wall. What do I need to fix it? And they say, well, you need some plaster and a knife and all that sort of stuff. So you buy that and you go and you plaster over the crack. And you think, great, problem solved. And you go there, you come home the next day and there's 2 cracks on the wall. So you go, oh, I better plaster those over as well. The next day there's 5 cracks, 10 cracks. And at some point you've got to say, I'm spending all of this time fixing every time a crack appears, I'm putting all this effort in and fixing that crack. At some point you've got to say to yourself, what's causing the cracks? Maybe if I fix the core, the reason why these cracks are appearing, maybe I wouldn't have to put in all this energy and effort, and maybe I could just come home and enjoy the house, which is what it's there for. And that's when you start to say, I need to look at the foundations. It's because the foundations of the house are there's something wrong with them, or they're falling apart. And of course, if you don't fix the foundations, you're not just going to end up with a few cracks on the wall. But while you're busy fixing the cracks, the house is going to fall down. And and this is so true about relationships. If you've got problems in your relationship, the cause of the problem is not the problem. The cause is what's causing the problem. And that's the structure of your relationship. That's what you need to look at. And the beauty is when you fix the foundations, sure, it's a bit more effort in the short term than just papering over a crack. But when you do that, you don't need to worry about it ever again. You can just enjoy it for what it is. And that's what my coaching programs are about. And I have another one called the 9 Habits of Great Relationships. And this is about what do the 5% do who the 95% don't do. They do these 9 things, which are just simple habits. Again, it's just changing the foundations. The foundations are the 9 habits. That's all you need to do. It actually works rather than spending all this time trying to paper over the cracks.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm looking at your book and I saw that you're on Audible as well. How did you get this? Did you do your recording? I just ordered this, by the way. So now my wife, we share an Audible account. So she's going to wonder why I'm downloading your book. But I have like 20 credits. I'm trying to get through all my my credits.
Oh, okay.
How did you narrate this yourself?
Yes. Yep. I'm very fortunate. I have a wonderful relationship with an amazing woman who, not only being the most brilliant genius of all time, she does all my technical stuff for me as well, builds my websites. And so she just comes along with a microphone and says, record this. And that's all I do.
Nice. Good to have one of them in your lives. But anyways, it was great having you on, Liam. And I think we covered some really good topics. Again, want to get you on here because I want to, my listeners are coming to me because they're thinking about divorce. They're considering divorce. They're in the middle of a divorce. So I know that, this content will get in front of people right when they need it the most.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And the best way to get a hold of you, Liam, is on your website, correct?
Yes, just liamnaden.com.
Very good. Well, thanks again. And if you can hang out for just a second, I'll sign us off here and we'll just